So we've talked a lot about like Next.js. So you talked about how like Takeout was like Tamagui and Next.js, and I sort of think of what you've built here as a new meta framework. I say meta framework in the sense of like Next.js or Remix or SvelteKit, or it seems to apply that layer. So you're using React and supporting React Native, which is the real novel sort of innovation here. But it has a lot of features that people would be familiar with: client-side rendering, server-side rendering, static site generation, routing, or file-based routing, etc. Would you like to like expand on that? Did I miss anything?
I mean, there's a lot of little things, but I think that, on a high level, yes, it's comparable to like a remix maybe, but like it gives you SSG, SPA, SSR, and works on native. So yeah, as it is today, I would say, obviously this whole zero thing is kind of where we're headed, but I think we're trying to be slightly fuller stack, but let you eject. It's kind of like the next wrinkle of it is like, again, kind of coming back to the Rails thing, which is like, I want people to be able to move really fast. And I do think this kind of local first like data solutions like Zero are clear. I think they're just clearly the way forward. And, a little bit of a corollary to maybe server components where a lot of people are heading. And that was actually, I guess that is a bit of the history too, is that like, I was very surprised to see server components, the way that they're designed and the way that they're implemented. It felt to me like a solution that requires you to know a lot of new concepts and do a lot of work for it. And in the end, it wasn't clear that it actually seemed to make your data loading and manipulation and data more complex in a way versus like a more local type solution. And so yeah, like there's a lot to talk about there, but I do think that like one of the big things that we're not focusing on is server components. Like we may want to bring in some of the bundle size stuff, but like avoid a lot of like we may implement basically a subset and like an opinionated limited subset, almost like a more like in order to get the bundle size savings, but the rest of it we're sort of like, I think once you have something like zero, it's so nice and like doesn't force you to think about the server boundary. So yeah, that would be the rest of it, I guess.
So in the docs, it seems like you allude to a lot of data loading stuff. I don't see any React query anywhere. You have your own use query hook. So how does like data loading work since you support all of these different targets like server rendered and client rendered? How does it all fit together?
Yeah, so we have, well, right today we have loaders, and that's mostly like for you to be able to migrate from something like Next or Remix. Like we needed it to migrate, and also because Zero is not like fully ready, and also Zero is more like Zero is a company that we are partnered with. The founder lives down the street from me, actually, funny enough, in a small town in Hawaii. That was just serendipity. I don't know how that happened, but um, I mean, that also predates the names. So it's not like we had one and zero like designed and then like that happened. They were working on Replicache, um, and I was introduced to them when I was working at Vercel. And then I thought Replicache was really cool, but I was like thinking, I tried it out. We were using it actually at Vercel for a project that I was working on, and I sort of like my feedback to them was go more, go deeper, like do more, solve it in a, because Replicache was a little bit more like BYO. You had to glue together a lot of stuff. You had to like kind of figure out the design of your data model a little bit more. You had to do your own like schema stuff. Like there was just a lot that you had to do. And I wanted something that was more like like magical, but more like, you just have this query, nice querying syntax, and it handles all the hard parts for you. And so I was a pain in their ass in terms of just being like, do that, do that. And they were sort of thinking about doing it. I think I helped motivate them to see how much people wanted that. And so like to Aaron's credit, who lives down the street from me, Aaron, I thought it was very impressive that they took that feedback and they basically were like, yeah, I mean, this is basically like a rewrite, but we're going to do it because it seems like the right thing to do. And so that's what they've done with Zero. And as they were building that out, and I saw them really making all these like great decisions, I thought, because to me, like they're like, so yeah, to get into what it is essentially, oh man, it's so hard to like poke in the right way because I know there's so many different perspectives here, but anyone who's used maybe I think like Firebase, Meteor, ParseDB, a native app where you use a local DB that you sync to a remote DB. These are all experiences where you essentially just have a query like syntax, like a SQL like, or some sort of querying syntax that you just use in your components. And they typically handle the rest. Like they give you real-time syncing. They give, and like a lot of them, in the ideal case, there's even PouchDB. There's been a bunch of these attempts that none have fully succeeded. I think modern ones are like Electric SQL, Instant DB. There's a bunch of people trying this, and it's never, I don't think it's been pulled off yet fully in a way. And but the ideal is sort of this thing that native apps pull off pretty often, because native apps don't have to worry about bundle size, and they also don't have that many people. I think typically they're not like these multiplayer. They're not also trying to do the multiplayer thing. They're just like you using your app. And what they give you is like amazing. I think they give you much simpler code than, say, maybe like React Query or something like GraphQL or something like, let's just say, server components. Like, I think they give you much simpler querying and much simpler code. They also give you better user experience. So it's like okay, so how does that work? It's a win-win. Why isn't everyone using them? Because if it's simpler code and better user experience, by the way, just because they have a client-side database, your mutations are instant. There's no server round trip, including updating other queries on the screen. Like I mutate something, it has to know all the queries, how they work. And so it can actually update, if you have a list over here and a thing over there that uses that query and it needs to update, it needs to actually know how to run the database on your client. And that's why they aren't more popular, I think, is because the way that people have tried to do that on the web is basically pulling in something like SQLite, which is like a 1 megabyte JavaScript, bundle size hit. And so that's why no one uses it on the web, because it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to bring down, or they just have weird limitations. I think a lot of them, like, PouchDB sort of did this without having a whole big bundle, but it had a ton of weird, it ran on CouchDB. You couldn't delete. Like it just had like a bunch of weird limitations. I tried it actually back in the day. I have loved this stuff for so long that, I tried to make it work for like a company that we were playing with, and it didn't. Firebase maybe is like, it doesn't give you the local stuff. It's, it mostly depends on the network. So maybe that's like a sort of it does some of the things you would expect, like with this nice querying syntax and real-time sync. So like there's maybe that is like the closest successful version. But to me, what Zero does that finally I think gets it over the hump. Well, one, it works with Postgres, so it can work with other database engines, but they're not going to focus on that for a while. But I think it's a huge win that like you don't need a custom weird database. Another example is RethinkDB back in the day. I don't know if you guys remember that, but RethinkDB was super cool. But also custom database. I just think that's why they didn't, obviously that's why they didn't end up working out. It's too much work. So they work just on Postgres, your existing schema too. You don't have to like buy into some custom weird data layout in your database. You can just use your existing tables. So I think that's one huge win. Next huge win is that their client-side database is custom implemented on top of that so that it's light. So it's not a huge bundle size hit, which is, I think that's a big one to me. That's the reason why it's never taken off on the web. And I think for now, like you can truly make it, work well for most websites, even if it's a website that needs to get like a great Lighthouse score. I think that's the key, is that they've done this custom database engine, but it looks a lot like SQL. It also does nested queries, subqueries, which I think is another big one for the modern world where we have React-like applications where you need to nest and compose queries down a tree. Because once you can nest and compose them, you can do something like a relay thing where you can build one giant query and then do no waterfalls. I think that's another, not as big, but pretty big, because it can work on server side then very well without waterfalls. And that's what we're doing with one, is we're making it work on server side very well. You sort of asked about like, how do we make that all work? Like, I think some of the stuff that one is doing that makes it work very well is that we are sort of like building out a lot of the server to client handoff and server side like functionality that lets you just kind of share your code and it just works. And so, yeah, it does. Like we have the beta that we've been playing with and building out tooling around. And yeah, like what you do is, what we actually even had like this sort of loader pattern that you had to like glue it into, but we actually found a way to get rid of that. So you can just use query anywhere. And then you do have to sort of chain it to the top. But like we're working on them with this like idea of like fragment type param type thing that I showed in the demo video, which I highly recommend people, maybe you can like link it or something, but like I do think the demo video does a great job of showing like if you really want to see the code that I did for the launch. And yeah, like it's just very cool. I mean, I just think that like there's a few more like, you can talk about like partial sync, smart syncing, deferring the storage to like another I think another huge problem with local first type solutions is that, you run out of storage locally and then what do you do? And that's like something that like a lot of them make you do. And they are handling that as part of it. So again, so many things to poke into. I think it's very cool, but I just think that because it solves the bundle size and works with just your database, those two things are like the huge ones. And then there's like a few other small ones that are also pretty rad.